Herb.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about your service in World War II?
Yeah. Okay. I think I was 14 when the Germans attacked Poland. That's in 1939. I was 16 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. That was in 1941. It was 2 years later when I'm a senior in 1943 is when I enlisted. And it was interesting that the Army, the Navy, and the Marines sent a group of recruiters to our high school, Liberty High School in Bethlehem. And we just showed up one day and they said, hey, we're having an assembly. We went there and they told us about a program that we might be interested in. And that was if we enlisted and took infantry basic training and passed the test, they would send us to college. And that's all I heard, because there's no way I'm getting to college. I had taken a college preparatory course, not having any idea how we'd ever afford to go. I heard the word college and I said, oh, boy, that's for me. I asked my mom and dad if I could enlist. I could, have waited till I got drafted. But the point is, my brother Tom was already in the invasion of Africa and in Italy. So he was 6 years older than me. And my brother John was married and had a child, so he had a deferment for a while. He didn't go into it about the time I did. So anyway, in 43, I enlisted, and I went up to Allentown I thought, well, I like airplanes. I'll go join the Air Force. So I went there to that recruiting office, and they did an eye test and said I couldn't go there. I didn't swim very well, so I wasn't going to the Navy, so I ended up going to the Army. And I was bummed out a little bit about not getting into the Air Force, because a lot of people in the Air Force wore glasses. But I didn't know that this program I was in, they were going to send me to officers training school. And officers in the Air Force are usually pilots, and they have to have good eyesight. So that's really why I didn't get in there. Nonetheless, I took the test at the Army recruiting service, and I weighed 121 pounds. I was skinny all my life. And that recruiter doctor said, do you really want to do this? And I said, yes. It was one of my best decisions ever. When I went to basic training, I went down to Camp Hood, Texas. There's a Fort Hood, Texas, and around it they were building camps for infantry people. The Fort Hood was a place where they would had people there in learning to operate anti-tank weapons. There were tracked vehicles with a gun that could attack a tank. So that was mostly Fort Hood, but I went down there, and it was just the exercise, the change in every day. We got up at 4:30 in the morning. It got to be 130 degrees in the shade by 1 o'clock. So we did all our training by 1. After that, we took classes under the trees because of the heat. But every day we carried a rifle, a pack, a helmet, and no matter where we went, we carried all that stuff. So it was this continual exercise. I think I just started to blossom, and I never left the mess hall full. I just hungry all the time. So I put on 15 pounds, and that was a blessing because I needed and strengthened. And then we did hikes of 5 miles, 10 miles. The 10 milers were always at a fast pace. I'm struggling with what the name of those attempt to. And then we eventually went on a 20-mile hike. But I found out that I could, no matter what happened, what kind of a hike, I could just keep lifting them up and putting them down. And I found I had stamina that I had no idea that I had. I just could keep going no matter what. My toes would be bloody by the end of the 20-mile hike, but I could keep going. So I learned to be strengthened, and I had stamina that prepared me for combat. After that, I was sent to the University of Florida, and I was only there 3 months before they decided they needed all these 18-year-olds. It was now 1944, and D-Day is going to show up. We never got involved in D-Day, but they needed all the young guys. So they sent us to the 94th Infantry Division. They just cut the whole program after 3 months. So that was kind of a blow, but we got there, and then they sprinkled us throughout a 15,000-man division. I never saw any of them except one guy after that. And till maybe after the war, I saw a few. So we train, now we're training in a H Company, which is heavy weapons. Now, H Company is a heavy weapons company, but every battalion has 3 companies that are infantrymen. They carry rifles. In heavy weapons, we have 2 heavy machine gun platoons and a heavy mortar platoon. So we're not riflemen, but we are heavy weapons. And I was in a heavy machine gun platoon. There's 6 guys in a platoon, basically a sergeant, a first gunner. He carries this huge 30-pound tripod. The second gunner carries the 30-pound water-cooled machine gun. And then there's 3 guys carrying ammo, and we also carry a rifle. The first and second gunner, they're got heavyweights, so they just carry pistols. We carry rifles to protect them and provide ammunition. I was number 3 in the squad, and I had a wonderful sergeant, John Lyons, and we had a wonderful captain, Captain George K. Wood, marvelous man, giant of a guy, and we had a good platoon. The first gunner was I think he was from West Virginia, a Southern guy, sort of, and he was a really nice guy. The second guy was from Western Pennsylvania. He was from the coal regions, and he kind of a nasty mouth, but he wasn't a bad person. And then there's me, and then the next fella he was a busted master sergeant or first sergeant. Never found out why, but his name was Vince Lamparella. And as time went on, he became my guard duty buddy. The last guy was Jerry Driscoll, who was I call him a ne'er-do-well. All he lived for was gambling and drinking. But that's the kind of guy. Now, our company had people from all walks of life. It was just unbelievable. I thought when I got into this place, they were playing craps on each end of the table when I first got there, at each end of the barracks. But they were from all walks of life, wonderful guys, just an amalgam of people, and especially the Southern boys. They all knew how to shoot. They already had shot on. I never saw a rifle really before. Little Jim, though, our machine gun was built as a design from 1917, World War I. Oh. Germans are all 1942. We were not prepared for that. When I was in basic training, we used a 1989 rifle, a British Enfield rifle. We didn't even have the regular M1 carbine rifle that were ready for the infantrymen. They all trained on us. We had these old rifles. Now they're bolt action, and I learned to shoot pretty well. I got maybe a 75% score. That makes you a marksman, but I was not a sharpshooter or anything like that. But why I bring this whole story up is because our riflemen had the M1, which is semi-automatic, and the Germans have to do the bolt action. Every time they shoot, they have to put the bolt, and then they have to aim again. But our guys could walk across the field with the rifle on their hips, all of them just shooting, pulling the trigger. And so the Germans had to keep down. So we had a big advantage there. But
were you the one holding the?
What's that?
Were you the one holding the machine gun or the semi-automatic?
I have a pack frame, and I have two ammo boxes on there, and I have a light carbine. I don't have the heavy. It's a semi-automatic though, but it's not a big heavy thing like the infantrymen were carrying. So that's how we were armed. We trained as a unit with the 94th. Now we're training how to move a machine gun and put it in position and that sort of thing. So we did that kind of training. And then it's time to go overseas. I think it's an interesting story to tell you about that. We were told what we should take with us, and we put all the stuff that they told us on our bunks. And then after we did that, we had to put that in our duffel bag. And the only thing we could wear was a pair of shorts. Okay? And everything else was to be burned by the supply sergeant. They wouldn't want anything else to go. I don't know how guys got cameras overseas, but some did. But nonetheless, that's what was done. So anyway, I happened to have a little cut in between one of my toes, and I kept one sock on for that. And I was going up to the latrine, and the captain happened to be sitting on the fence there, and he asked me why I got the sock on. I told him why, and he told me, go take it over to the thing that's burning, okay? I thought he wouldn't mind me going to the latrine first and coming back to do that. And as soon as I walked towards the latrine, he said, "Soldier, where are you going?" I said, "Well, I was going to go to the latrine first." So anyway, I had to take it off or get it burned. I got punished for that. The next day, the last day in Camp McCain, Mississippi, I was assigned to clean the urinals.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine we're leaving this place and we have to clean the yellow off the urinals? I had something called Bon Abbey and a rag. And that was pretty much it. So I'm rubbing, and it's not coming off. I have to use my fingernails to get this stuff off. And it was about 4 other guys doing the same thing, but it took forever to do it. Can you imagine going to eat dinner? You no matter how much you wash your hands, it still smelled.
Oh, no.
I was upset mainly because I would learn to revere Captain K. Wood, but I got punished twice, and both times I got latrine duty, but only once from him. So it was time to go overseas. Got a train, and we went up to Erie, Pennsylvania, and over to Camp Shanks, New York. It was a camp just north of New York City where we were going to debark on a ship. And there we practiced climbing down a rope ladder, which is what we're going to have to do overseas. I'd never had a beer. I decided to go to the PX and drink a beer. I'd never smoked or drank anything. So I went over there by myself to the PX. There was nobody else around for some reason, a couple of people, but nobody I knew. So I drank this beer. I didn't know why anybody drank this stuff. It tasted awful to me. But when I got up, couldn't walk straight. So that's why I was happy that no one was around. So that was my last beer for a long time. That was another step. So then now we're getting on the ship. We had one night in New York City. I don't know what we did, but we had one night to tour around on it. And the next thing and our particular battalion was assigned guard duty on the ship. And it turns out it's the Queen Elizabeth. I think it was number 1. And it takes 5 days to get there. And no submarine can even come close to going as fast. And it's still tacked, even so. so they wouldn't get a direct shot. And it took only 5 days to get there. But while we're on the dock loading up, it took, I don't know, several days to get 15,000 people on the ship. We got a ditty bag from the Red Cross. We got shaving stuff and so forth. And guess what? A little New Testament. I still have it. This New Testament has a letter from Franklin D. Roosevelt commending us to read the scripture that been helped many men over the years get solace. And so anyway, that was a pleasure. I kept that thing. I'm going to digress a little bit because when we're overseas in a foxhole, we found out one day everybody kept their letters in this pocket, plus our New Testament, plus our little packet of toilet paper. And we would sit around wondering whether that would stop a bullet. So this is just chatter. No one really thought it would, but nonetheless, that was where we kept our stuff. I have a pouch, still have it, that was used for keeping the toilet paper, and I show it to people, and I ask them what it's for, and nobody has ever guessed it except my son-in-law. He broke the thing after I showed that up at the World War II weekend in Reading. So anyway, we're overseas in England. We land in Scotland. That ship landed up there where it was almost made. It can't get to any dock, so we got off, and they ferried us to the land, and we started traveling down to England, where we're going to be in the base for about 3 weeks. Southwestern England, a place called Chippenham. And there, on the way down, the British people, when we'd stop at a station, they would feed us. That happened a couple of times. But another episode there was shocking. We saw at one station a Negro American soldier walking with a white girl. And my best friends, these Southern boys I loved, they went berserk. They had never seen anything like that before, and it was I had never seen it either, but it was a shocking thing to see those guys that I loved to go just ape, swearing and cursing, and everything was sad. So that was a big shock. Anyway, we go down there. We're living in a tent city. And we go with a 5-mile hike, a 10-mile hike, and a 20-mile hike because we've been several weeks where we on trains and not doing any exercise. We did that, and then it's time where we went to London, and we got a 2-night pass to London, and that's where we saw one of these V-bombs. Heard a V-bomb come over, and there are different versions, but there's one that has a little engine to it that has a timer. And when it gets to its target, the timer turns off the engine and it comes down. So if you hear the put, 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 you know it's still going somewhere. Once it stops, it's coming down and somebody's in trouble. So we heard one of those. And then we went back and got together and started going for the ships at Southampton. We put on troop ships at night, and I think just in one night we crossed over into France. Got another episode to tell you on the ship. Before we got on the ship, we had some training where they had soldiers dressed as Germans showing how they, with their machine gun, how they attack. And in addition, they have a display of German weapons. That's when I found out all the German machine guns are 1942. Ours is 1917. I got upset and I wrote a letter to my father. That was the first letter I sent from overseas, and my lieutenant, what's the word? he read it, and the officers read all the letters and wrote their name on it that they had done it. But anyway, he saw what I wrote, and he wasn't happy about that. So on the way over, he comes into this room where we're just jammed together, and he's looking for latrine duty people. And the way they get volunteers, so they go you, and you. That's how they volunteer. But anyway, I got on latrine duty again. So I'm going to tell you another story.
Go for it.
The latrine is a box on the deck, and it's so long it can't be straight. It's at an angle across the deck. There's about 8 holes in it. It's maybe 2 feet high and a couple of feet wide. And at one end, there's a hole, and I have a pole with a piece of wood across, and I pushed all the excrement out overseas. That's before we had
Jeez.
the current people worrying about the ocean. So that was a messy thing. That was my second punishment. That's my last punishment. So we get to Utah Beach, and it's covered with ships that are sunk. The smokestacks are sticking out from the D-Day battles, and there's other ships bringing things to shore from the bigger ships. So we have to climb down a ladder, rope ladder, and you got your pack on, full field pack on, and your rifle, and you're climbing down the ladder. Now the ladder goes down to a landing ship down below. So you're climbing down. I'm hanging on for dear life, and I'm looking down, and I see that this rope goes bends over into the ship, and 2 guys are holding the end of the ladder. And so I go down, and I also notice that this little landing craft is banging into the big ship. Bang, bang, and it's rocking, and banging, banging. And if you fall down there, you're done. So that was scary. When I get down to the bottom, how am I going to get off to this rocking boat? Well, the guy said jump, so they caught me in their arms. And another Navy guy got me into a bench, and then we landed there. Now I'm going to do some summaries here now. We spent from September 1944, this is 90 days after D-Day, we spent from there till pretty close to January, containing some Germans in 2 submarine ports at Lorient and Saint-Nazaire. They're on the coast, the Brittany coast. What's the name of the beaches where we landed? What's that?
Is it Utah Beach? Or?
No, yeah, those are the beaches, but that area is different. Brittany is a different province than that, and it's on the Atlantic. And the Germans had 5 or 6 submarine ports there. Now, it's interesting that at this time when we get there, we have already figured out how to stop the U-boats out in the middle of the Atlantic. Did you ever know that the U-boats were sinking ships like crazy out there? But we took merchant ships and put decks on them and had airplanes flying off them, flying around looking for submarines and dropping bombs on them. And the Germans quit, and we sank so many of them in that past year that they weren't doing it. But still, submarines that were a danger now around Britain. So these things, and after D-Day, when our army broke through and drove the Germans back up at the Belgian and Germany, the Germans retreated 60,000 men to protect those. Now, we have only 15,000, and they had 35 battalions of artillery. So our captain says, we're not going in after them, which was a good thing. We had some episodes there that I can tell you about, but pretty much not a lot happened there. We had our first casualties. We had my first experience with artillery, and I'll tell you that story. I'm just generally saying that we had a lot of interesting things that happened, but not a lot of fighting. I think maybe we had 100 casualties in 4 or 5 months, and we actually had a prisoner exchange with the Germans. But we never attacked them. It's all the rifle companies were out there patrolling and getting into fights with the Germans.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I remember at World War II weekend, you mentioned that you were either a messenger or a runner at one point, and you had a story about that.
That's later. I'll get to that,
Yeah.
but I'll just tell you a couple little things that happened there worth noting. We no sooner got to this area than the captain sent the whole company up to the front line, but he kept 2 squads back around about a mile back around his headquarters. And it was September, and I looked around and I found a slit trench. We had relieved the 6th Armored Division, so they must have dug this hole. And it's all hedgerows. So this is up against the hedgerows. Hedgerows are maybe up to your shoulder. So when you're living in the hedgerow country, you have to learn to have the hedgerow stoop. You have to walk around like this. Other little gems, the privates anyway, we would, if we saw another private, we would go, Heil Hitler in case we lose, but that was another joke. But that's how we lived in the hedgerows. And so there was a slit trench. I said to myself, that's where I'll go if anything happens. And I lay down on my shelter half and then my blankets. It was September. I had all my clothes on. I didn't have to cover up. I no sooner laid down there and the German artillery started pounding this area. And I'm telling you, I was so scared. I flew into that ditch and I tried to climb into the helmet, and I'm so scared. I'm praying to Jesus, save me, save me, save me. I'll do anything if you'll only save me. I've just over and over and over until the artillery stopped. And I tell everybody at that moment I was a useless soldier. Now, I had not been afraid of artillery till that moment. My fear was that I would run away. I'd be scared. But I didn't do that, but I was really scared of artillery. But that prayer undoubtedly helped me because 2 things happened. From that moment on, I was in constant fear that this is going to happen again. All soldiers have the same thing. They have to live in constant, I call it every living minute breathing fear for 8 months. But another thing happened at that moment. From that on, I was able to do my best. That's the title of my book that I wrote. The best that I could do. No matter what they asked me, I was able to do it, in spite of the fear. And I'm positive that prayer gave me courage. They gave me what I needed. So I just wanted you to know that. That's the first time that the Holy Spirit was really working for me. So that was an interesting thing. There's a lot of other stories I can tell you about that would take days. But eventually the Battle of Bulge started. The Germans counterattack. We thought the Germans were beat. The Germans had been planning for months to counterattack. And this is in Belgium and Luxembourg. They had lined up 27 divisions, and we had put 4 divisions there, 2 of them which were experienced but had been in the Hurtgen Forest battles, and they were resting there. We also had a 99th Division, which was only there 5 weeks, and then we had a very experienced 2nd Infantry Division there, 4 against 27. The Germans have 10,000 in a division. We have 15, so it's not quite as bad, but it's a big difference. Where they started with like 1,000 guns firing, and that was 5 o'clock in the morning in December 16th. The Battle of Bulge starts. Now, I want you to know we've been back there, and those people still celebrate that time when the Americans came to their rescue. We went there in the winter. I didn't want to go in the winter, but that turns out it was the time to go. And we got a group and we went over and we were taking bus rides all around that area. And we found out the people there love us and still do. Two guys from Luxembourg came to visit us, and they took us all through the battlefields. And by the way, in the meantime, our bus rides are visiting all sorts of villages. And they have 40 villages today. Once a year at that time, they have a vigil at 5 o'clock in the morning when the battle starts. They still celebrate that, and we've been over to that. But that's the Battle of Bulge. What happened was that we stopped them by the 28th. General Patton was in Europe, in France, and he sent his army up after he told Eisenhower he could do that. And eventually we got the 101st Airborne to go into Bastogne. They were surrounded, but they stopped the Germans. The Germans had to go around them, and so did the other divisions. They fought well. And we stopped them mainly because we kept holding them up. Just a couple of days, they were trying to get to the coast, which are now based where supplies are coming to Antwerp, which is a big place. Up until there, all the supplies came through the beaches, which are, quite a distance from where the battles are now. And so the Germans were trying to get there, but they didn't get there. The guys stopped them. So that's the Battle of Bulge in a few words. So we thought we would immediately be sent to the Battle of the Bulge, but they were bringing divisions over from England, and it would take 2 days to relieve us, to trade. And for a while, we weren't sent. They sent them quickly to the battle. And then an accident happened. A German submarine sank one of the ships of the 66th Division, which was coming over from England. And the 66th Division lost a lot of men. So they decided to bring them and take over what we're doing, and we were sent to the Battle of the Bulge. And the Battle of Bulge, after it was stopped, I think we lost 5,000 men stopping it, and then they pushed the Germans back to Germany. That took 15,000 men, and that went all the way through January. So we had moved up around the 1st of Division. And another interesting thing happened there. We went by train from Brittany up to above Paris to a place called Reims. And we got off there and we were put on trucks. I didn't know it then, but there was a big problem because one of the divisions that was going up to help Patton from an area I'll describe in a minute, they had sent 2 regiments and they only had one holding the line. So we spent the next 13 hours in a truck with no lights and no stopping on January 1, just freezing. It was the coldest winter they had, and it was just, all we could do was stamp our feet and wiggle our toes. We couldn't move. We were jammed in a truck. Somebody had to relieve themselves. Someone had to hold them over the tailgate, and it was pretty hard time. We went past Verdun, huge cemetery from World War I, and then we saw body bags lined up along the side of the road, like 40 body bags piled up about 3 high. That was pretty scary when you're knowing you're going into combat. And but we made it, and when we got off, it was just the cobblestone streets were covered with ice. And I was very fortunate. Again, I got in reserve and I got into a house that night. A lot of guys said to go right into the front line, but I got out of that for a couple of days. So that was our introduction to something we called the Siegfried switch line. There's the Moselle. Yeah, the Moselle River comes from France and goes into Germany at an angle just below Luxembourg. And then down south of that is France. This battle place where we were was just inside Germany. And it had the river, the Moselle on its left, and the Saar River over here came up at an angle and hit the Moselle. So there was a triangle along the Moselle, the Saar River, and the French border. So that was the area that our group was sent to. Now they were the upper command, the Corps commander told us, our general, that we don't want you guys to get too involved here. So you're only allowed to have one battalion attack at a time. So our camp commander had one battalion attack today, another one tomorrow, and a third one tomorrow. Now there's 3 regiments. They even all have 3 battalions, so that's 9 battalions. I think I was like the 8th battalion that I was allowed to attack. And that was on a little German village by the name of Sins. You have to know this whole battlefield, there were like 12 villages, all full of Germans. They had minefields around them. They had tank ditches in front of the area. They had bunkers. We saw a gigantic one on a tour that we went, but there were like 80 concrete pillboxes. And that's what the 94th was up against. But our guys were doing really well. Each one of those battalions had taken several villages. The enemy decided they needed help, so they got a unit from one of their armored divisions to attack, and they took some of the villages back, and we got a unit from the 8th Armor, our own, and we took the stuff back again. And but all the time, people are dying walking in the minefields and so forth. So I can remember this story where we were getting ready to attack Sins, and we were left off. They took us in trucks to a certain place, and it was snowing, and we were walking up past a village, and the village was practically dilapidated, but we had captured it, and we turned right down a road, and there were about a dozen dead Germans there. They'd been attacking and got killed. We walked past that through a field with about a foot of snow, and we got into a wooded area, and that's where we're headed. As we got in there, it's a little harder to walk because there's branches underneath the snow, and you had to make sure that you didn't trip over that. But I tripped anyway, and it turns out when I was getting up, I accidentally knocked the snow off a dead German. I tripped over a frozen German, and for a 19-year-old, that was another shock. But you couldn't dwell on it. You just had to keep following your way up. So we got up to the top of the hill, the edge of the woods, and we could see Sins down below. And we basically found, fortunately, 2 holes. And they must have been dug, we think, by the Germans, because they even had they had logs on top of them. And inside there were German ammunition, empty German ammunition boxes for the floor. It wasn't too bad. Now you could get 4 guys in each of these holes. Each of the 2 squads that were there had 6. So with 2 people on guard duty from each squad, there was enough to rotate. Now, we've been doing this before, but it turns out that in the infantry, you're on guard duty 2 hours, all 4, around the clock. You never get 8 hours sleep. So that's one challenge. And I always say you never even get the 4 hours sleep because the guys come and wake you up early to make sure you come out and relieve them. And then when you go back to get yourself wrapped up in your blankets and so forth, so you lose a few more minutes. But that we did that all the time that we were in Europe. 2 hours on, 4 hours off. I don't know how many days we were there, but somebody decided that it was so cold that we'd have one man from each squad go back to company headquarters in a village about a mile away. So Sergeant Lyons said the first gunner should go to first night, the second gunner, and I'm number 3. I went on the third trip back. And when I got back there, the first sergeant says, "You're getting a break. You're going to get a 40-hour rest." Now, I got on a truck with a bunch of other guys when we went back to France, and there was a big tent there. It was actually a French camp, a fort or whatever. But we went into this big tent, and I got my one shower in 6 months. And then I had the biggest meal you could ever. I think they dusted me off with something. I don't know what they had in those days. And then they took my clothes and washed them and somehow got them dry. I don't know how they did that. But anyway, I had 2 nights there, got my hair shaven, a haircut. I even think there was a U.S. Coast show there. Don't remember that, but I know I had the biggest dish of pie and ice cream I'd ever seen. So that was a good time. I wrote some letters. And now I want you to know that we did wash ourselves, but this is how if you get a little bit of time back at company headquarters, send a few guys back, and they would give you a helmet full. Our helmets sat on top of a helmet liner. You had a helmet liner which had straps inside that fit your hat, but this was like a bowl. You got a hot water in your helmet. You shaved, got all your little hairs in there, and then you started taking your clothes off in 0-degree weather. We take our shirt off, and that means your field jacket, your overcoat, your field jacket, your long johns, just to wash the top of your body. Put that all back on, and then you start taking your boots and things off to get the rest of your body. It took forever. Of course, the water's not hot anymore, but it's also not cold. That's the way we lived. One other little thing is that we always wore 2 pairs of socks. At least I did. My mother knitted 2 pair. I had 2 GI ones, and you kept 2 double pairs on, and the other pairs under your shirt, because in the daytime they would sweat and they'd lose the insulation. So you put them under, and your body heat would actually dry them off. Now, there were some divisions that they made sure people did that every night. We didn't do it quite every night, but guess what? You never got to wash the socks or anything of your clothing forever.
Oh,
So
gosh.
that's how we lived.
Wow.
Anyway, it was time to go back from the rest area, and the captain sent me, gave me 2 replacements and told me to take them to Sergeant Parback. He was our platoon sergeant. I hadn't seen him all the time I was overseas. While we were up on that hill there, looking at sins for so many days, I didn't see any officers or anything. Our lieutenant was wounded, so we didn't see him. I went to see him Parback, and he was in a big hole covered with logs, and he gave me a walkie-talkie, and he says, and showed me how to use it. He says, "Now you're going to join the 2nd platoon, not the 1st platoon that you were in, and you're going to be their guide. So all of a sudden, I'm taken out of my squad and for a different job. And this is how I got into being a runner. But at this point, I'm a guide. It's nighttime and it starts to rain, so I put on my poncho. He told me to follow the telephone wire. We did have telephone wires. That's our main community. I should follow that. And I held that in one hand and followed it that way and walked up pitch black because it's raining and dark in the woods. But I'm worried that if they have guards, I don't know what the password is. Nobody tells me that. But they weren't just standing guard, so it was a joke. I did find the lieutenant. He was a nice guy. And not too long after that, by the way, I forgot I forgot a little story that fits in here. When I came back from the rest area, G Company, where my buddy John Gardy from back in the States was standing there, and he said, "We're attacking Sins in the morning." Now, he's in a rifle company, and he's scared, and he said, "I'm going to have to be Superman to get through this." He gave his Mickey Mouse watch to one of the clerks that's not going to be in the battle in G Company. I even have to go back further. Back in the States, G Company was next to H Company that I was in. And so Gardy was the only guy from the ASTP, the Florida and all those places, basic training that I got to see. We used to pal around, so we became friends. But over there, I hadn't seen him till that day. And it turns out 2 days later, he was missing in action. I got letters from my mother asking if I knew anything about John Gardy. All I know is he's missing. His mother is contacting my mother. There's all kinds of messages going back and forth. I have one of her letters, Mrs. Gardy. And after the war, I did go to see her, because John was eventually found, and he's buried over there. So anyway, I'm now with the 2nd Platoon, and our artillery starts firing. That's the beginning of the attack in the morning, and then we know the Germans are going to fire back. So the lieutenant said, "Let's all get in this ditch." It wasn't a very deep ditch, but we got in it, and the most of the shells went over. One piece of shrapnel landed right here, and I showed it to the lieutenant, and he said, "Well, we got to find a better place than this." So I said, "I know where there's some holes up in the front of this wood where I've been before." So in the middle of the night, I led them up there, and I found the holes by falling into one of them. And so the lieutenant and I got in there, and the next hole was an artillery observer, and we were hearing that G Company was doing pretty good in Sins. And then I got a call on my walkie-talkie, and the guy said, "Come over to the edge of the woods." And he said, "You see that building down there and it says it's blackened?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, that's where you're to come." So I told the lieutenant, and now it's past dawn, it's daylight, and this rain had melted the snow, which is February. I couldn't believe that, but it happened. So we walked down the hill, and I saw some black boxes on the ground, and I said to the lieutenant, "Those look like mines." I'd never actually seen one before. And he said, "Yes, they do." So we lined up, and I walked right through a minefield into this building, which was a barn, but it was a stone barn. And the guy that had called me said, "You weren't supposed to come till tonight." He forgot to tell me that. So I figured I really goofed up. But my captain was there, and I said, "Captain Kaywood, I brought the 2nd Platoon." He didn't say anything to me. He turned to the battalion commander and said, "I got 4 more machine guns, so goof up, whatever." I got them there early. Now you have to reflect on this thing. If it hadn't rained, the snow wouldn't have melted. Wouldn't have seen the mines. If I'd come at night, I wouldn't have seen the mines. So what's happening here? You wonder about this. when we were up on the hill previously, there was a sniper that was shooting at us. So where was he when we're walking down there? And in addition, we had heard from this artillery observer, we just heard his voice, that F Company had tried to attack the woods behind Sins, and the German artillery drove them off. So where was the German artillery when we walked down in broad daylight, lined up like you're not supposed to be doing? I think, again, the Holy Spirit is working overtime again. So that's part of my story. I don't know that there's a lot more to tell you, except that the captain said, come with me. And so I stayed with the captain, and he made me a runner now. I'm a guide, now I'm a runner. So we go into the next basement there. It's in the rear of Sins, and we've captured most of it in the first day. And he says, I want you, I think it got to be nighttime. He said, I want you to go find out where the second platoon is and see how they're doing. So I go outside, and the Germans are shelling the place. And I have to go down the side of the building, and I did. I found one of our guys outstanding guard there and took me down in the basement where they were, and I found out they're okay. But while I'm going and coming, I hear something called screaming Mimes. They're actually German rockets. The Germans have a gadget that fires a bunch of rockets all at one time. They're called Nebelwerfers, I think, and they make one really weird sound. It's a vibrating noise. I tell people that it sounded to me like a giant took railroad tracks and banged them together, and they made all this noise. I'll walk through all that stuff and back, and I told the captain everything's fine. So the next day, he sends me to go find the first platoon, not my platoon, and I have to go down a road, the main supply road coming into Sins for our guys, and I got to get to a woods called I'll think of it. Undersea Bush, it was called. But I go outside and I see that the Germans are lobbing shells on this road I got to go on. And I looked it over and I saw on the German side of the road, there's a little wall about this big. The Germans are all up on the hill. They can certainly see me. So I take a running leap and jump right and land right against that wall. And I wait for another shell to go over. And the first time I got just tensed up, and then when the next shell went over, I ran again. But after that, I just waited for one shell, and then I ran again and flopped down. I did that about, I'd say 8 times, and I came to a house. I knew that if I got that far, they wouldn't be able to see me. For some reason, they didn't shoot at me. I have no idea. But I got through the shells, and but when I got there were 4 dead Germans in a hole, all dead. And they're covered with blood. It's a horrible situation. And they smell, it's just unbelievable. I had to get out of there. And so I kept running, and I was now hidden by the woods, and I found Sergeant Colvin. He's in the wooded area. Now, he's in what I call a bunker. If you're in an area where you can't dig down because there's water, or it's too hard to dig, sometimes you have to use dynamite to get through the crusted, cold ground. But in this case, it's because the water level was too high. You build a little log cabin 3 logs high and cover it with logs. So if a shell comes and hits up in the trees, the shrapnel comes down and it doesn't get to you because you got the logs there. So I saw him in one of those, and I crawled in with him, and I asked him how the company was doing there, the platoon, and he said they were all right. I could have gone up further in the woods and found my squad, but I thought I'd done enough. Everyone was. So I had to now go back through the artillery again. I did the same thing on the way back. And I got to the captain and told him everybody was okay. So he was happy. It's a long story, but they captured Sins, but they hadn't captured the woods behind it. And they sent out 4 groups of 25 men, including one with John Gardy in it. And there were German tanks in this place. And that's why F Company couldn't get in there. This time they sent 6 tank destroyers up there. Now, tank destroyers are not tanks. They're tracked vehicles, and they have a cannon. The German tanks got out behind them and knocked out all 6 of them. And 3 of the groups were outflanked by those tanks, and those guys ran. And after the battle, I had guys telling me that the only ones that got out of there are the ones that ran away. But the captain had John Gardy's platoon in a certain area, and I was in this basement when it happened. John Gardy was the radio man for that lieutenant, and the lieutenant said that my position's becoming untenable, and he wanted to withdraw. And the colonel said no, he had to move somewhere else. And the next message coming back was the Germans are shooting in our foxholes. And that's when John was killed. I thought he died needlessly. That lieutenant had been able to retreat. It would have been a big improvement. But anyway, that was a sad affair. So we lost so many men there that the next day we left the place and we went to a reserve area. While there, we had a critique of the battle and the fact that our bazookas didn't seem to help with the German tanks. Our guys the infantry was told to go in this woods, find the tanks, and use those, they called them torpedoes on the treads and knock them out, but they never got close to them. And it was just a sad thing all the way around. So anyway, I got called to the captain's office, and he wants to make me a recon sergeant. Whenever the captain goes out in the beginning to look over a place where he's going to put his men, takes the recon sergeant with him who carries binoculars, and they figure out where things are going. And then sometimes he sends the recon sergeant guy back to get them, the men, and then he places them in where they're supposed to be. Well, anyway, he had no sooner said, "Do you want to be that?" Then I was about to say yes when somebody comes at the door, and it's a medic, and he's calling for Private Ridyard. And I asked the captain if I had to go. He said, "Yeah, you have to go." So this guy took me back to another building. Now it's still freezing out, and it's freezing in the building. It tells me to take my shoes and socks off and sit there. I left a little incident out when we came back to this reserved area the first night. We all just flopped on the floor. It was nighttime. And the doctor came by and checked our feet. So we had to take our boots and socks off. And I felt him take my pulse behind my ankle. I don't know how he knew who had what or if what happened. But anyway, I was apparently called and told to sit on a bench, take my shoes and socks off, and sit there and wait. It was freezing. I put my socks on the floor, my feet on top, and I'm sitting there waiting. If my feet weren't frozen before, they were getting there pretty soon. So another guy comes by and he said, "What are you doing here?" I told him, and then he leaves, and eventually the doctor comes, and he checks my feet. He doesn't say anything to me, and he sends me to a hospital. I got in an ambulance, and I'm taken back to France and Thionville Hospital. The hospital is a hospital for gas patients, but there are no gas patients, so it's mostly all trench foot, they call it, frozen toes. So that's where I went, and put us on our beds. We're not supposed to get up, and we do exercises in the day, putting our feet up on the wall, putting them on the bed, hanging them over the bed to try and increase the circulation. My next, we're getting juice and stuff fed without getting out. So we had it made in the shade. And I was there maybe 3 weeks. And I think the last week I was better enough that I even got to see a movie or a play in France, in Thionville. Then I was sent to a convalescent hospital, and my whole squad was there ahead of me. So they were in that place where there was a high water table, and so they all had the same thing. Convalescent hospital. There was nothing to do there except watch a train yard where I'd never seen this before. It was a slanted rails. They took boxcars and sent them down, and then they took another one, and they loaded up trains. They would bang and clamp together. That was our excitement. But there was one other exciting. Every Monday morning, they took us in a place where the doctors examined us and decided whether we're going back to duty. That's called a return to duty, an RTI. And we got by 2 of those. So the third week, we're there, and he says, everybody's getting RTI. So that means you're going back to your outfit. Nobody really wanted to go after, but we have one guy, a joker, Kazakowski. He has it all planned that the minute they say he's an RTI, he's going to say, I have a pain. And the doctor's going to ask him where, and he says, up and right. Well, he means his heart, but I don't know what up and right had to do with that. But the doctor ignored him. Everybody went back. So now we're sent to another place. Now, by the way, another 3 weeks there, and then we go to a repo depot. It's a replacement depot. Their replacement depot where new soldiers are brought over. I think they had a system where they took men and they trained them for 8 weeks how to shoot a rifle, and they shipped them over. And then they go to a repo depot and they'd be sent to different places to fill in where there were casualties. This was a nice place. There was movies there and places to read. I even went outside to a dinner on Easter, and but I thought when I got there, and I have letters. I have all my letters. My mother said that I'm thinking I should be out of there in a couple of days to get back to my outfit, but no, another 3 weeks went by. And guess what? By this time, it's the end of April. The war is almost over. And eventually I got on a train. They took me to Germany, and then they took me back. And then finally they took me up to the Ruhr. You had to go up to Belgium, Luxembourg and Belgium, and then cross the Rhine River. The 94th was put in there for occupation duty. So occupation duty was interesting. We searched houses. We'd go to a house, and the sergeant would knock on the door and read a proclamation that we were allowed to search their houses. You go in, and whoever's in the house gets the keys. They have all their keys in the kitchen, and he goes around, and every drawer, every closet, everything is locked. So he had to open all these things for us to search. But we went through that. And we found uniforms, propaganda stuff, cameras, anything that Hitler used or somebody could use to cause trouble, weapons, anything Nazi, we took it back and dumped it on the bed. And then I thought they were going to give the stuff back, but no, that just turned out these spoils. Everybody took something and shipped it home. So that's what we did for I don't know how many weeks, a couple of weeks, and then we got posted to guard Germans. Now, first we're searching their houses. I want to say that a couple of things we found was a magazine just lying in a bedroom, has a picture of the ugliest Jewish person, dirty, whatever, Russian person, and inside it compares them to this beautiful blonde German soldier. It's all propaganda. Those people had to live with that garbage all the time. Another place had a pretty little wooden box, which inside I call them merit badges, but every one of them was a Hitler Youth badge that this lady's daughter had earned in the Hitler Youth. All had a swastika on each little item. So we took that too. She wanted to keep it well. You're not having Nazi stuff. So we not only took everything that had anything to do with Nazis, but we didn't personally do this, but they took whatever government there was, city government or township government. They got rid of all the Nazis. Anybody who had been a part of the party was removed, and only people who had not been were allowed to govern the Germans after that. So next step was guarding Germans. So we're searching houses, now we're guarding Germans. And I got assigned to the bakery. There was the bakery, the butcher shop, and something called the potato warehouse. So, because food is essential. And while all of this is going on, a lot of the French and Russian prisoners are now released. Their encampments are found and they're released. And our army has to now feed these guys, but they're also a danger for the Germans. So the war's over. Now we're on the German side guarding them. And my post, as I said, was the bakery. The family lived above it, and the bakery was down below. And we took turns doing that during the day. I'd show up on an early tour of duty there, and all the cigarettes that had been used by the Americans, some little German guy was there picking them up and taking the papers off and saving the tobacco that was still useful. Another little gem was that some officers were coming in a Jeep, parking near my station, and going across. A lieutenant would go off, or whatever officer would go across the street to a building that looked like a factory. And coming back, I never knew what that was. I call it the mystery Jeep. Not right away, anyway. And then came Elfriede Fink. Elfriede Fink's a German daughter she's coming back, she tells me, from Nuremberg. Pretty well figured out that that's really a center for the Nazis, Nuremberg. So I figured she at least was working for them now. So you have to know that the Germans are all returning to their places that are all bombed out, got no place to go. So they put them in displaced persons camps. So that's a thing that they have to learn about. And so they got no place to go. The places is not every place, but the big cities are all destroyed. So she comes home and we get to talking from the upper window when I'm on guard duty. And I'm learning German words by this time. I had a couple days when I got to go to town and look at stuff. And there's also something called non-fraternization laws. We're not allowed to talk to any German. Well, that's kind of ridiculous because not only are we guarding them, but we also have a Jeep tour around the farmers to protect them, to see if they're okay. And I went on one of those, and we got to talk to Germans there. And the little girl was had a cowboy book, believe it or not, that she enjoyed. And I didn't even know if I was allowed to talk to her, but I did. So anyway, Elfrida invites me to come to dinner. So like a dummy, I did. I went back and after I was off guard duty, I went back there and I went to dinner. I put my rifle in they had a little entryway, foyer, you can call it. I put my rifle there and hung up my other stuff and went in the living room, and her aunt is playing an organ, and she's playing a flute, and they're singing Lutheran hymns, which I know some of those hymns, so I'm trying to remember some of the words and singing along. And after a while, then we go to dinner. We had one egg, a piece of cabbage, and a slice of black bread. Now, you have to know that bread that was being made in those days for Germans had sawdust in it. But I'm positive the baker's not going to be eating sawdust in his bread. So I had one piece of bread. I felt sorry for them at that point. And next thing you know, there's a knock on the door, or the doorbell rings. I forget which. I thought, oh, man, if that happens to be an American officer, I'm in big, big trouble. But Frida goes to the door, and she brings in 3 young girls. They come through an archway like that, and they all go Heil Hitler. They embarrassed the family because I already told them a big lie. I told them that my mother came from Germany. I was covering myself. And I picked Leipzig because I knew she was from Leipzig. So I had covered myself some, but now we got 3 Nazis coming in, and they're just little girls, and they're just a pain. Anyway, I wanted to get out of there as soon as I could. So, and that's actually what happened. But by the next time I'm on guard duty, I'm asking her, what is this building across the street? And she said, well, it's a factory, but it's also a place where you can buy silverware. And those officers, they're going over buying this stuff. Is that called fraternization? I don't know. But can you make it out of there? So I asked Frida Fink if she can help me, get in over there. And so she has a friend in that place that comes to the window, and they give the high sign that it's clear of American officers. And I went over there and I bought 2 sets of silverware. Now, I'm a little naive. I think it's silver, and I think I got but after I get home, I shipped it home, took it home. And Nancy tells me it's stainless steel. But it doesn't matter. We used it. So that was pretty much the end of that, because we shipped out of there. I never saw Frida again. We went to Czechoslovakia. Beautiful ride down the Rhine. I think we were on the Mains River, and we were on the Danube in boxcars. In my time in Europe, I think I was in boxcars about 9 times. But this is a ride that you pay a lot of money today, all the way to Czechoslovakia. And we were taken to a place, I'll skip one little story. But we were taken to a place called Blatna, and it was in a Sacco. I didn't know what a Sacco was, but it seemed like a social place of some kind. I looked it up on Google some time ago. The Czechs had invented some kind of a program in which you join this outfit, the Sacco, and you should get educated, and you also exercise, a combined physical improvement and mental. And it's spread out all over Eastern Europe. But that's what was it. And we slept in this place and played volleyball with the kids, and they were good. They did a lot of that. Our best guys couldn't beat them. They were just incredibly good. But we had fun there, and there was a lot of time to exercise, go swimming, things like that. So we had a great time. But it was, a time to want to go home. Eventually, our top officers left. Captain Kaywu was assigned somewhere else, and we had parties when everybody left. And then our non-coms left because they'd been in the Army longer. So there was a point system that you had to learn. For every month you were in the service, you got a point. For every month you were in overseas, you got another point. So anybody had been in there long, they got a lot of points. I think most everybody in the 94th, when I joined them, had already been training for a year. So they had a lot of points. Anyway, I started to they had parties, and I started to sing songs, and I enjoyed that a lot. We had a good time. Singing is a different story, but anyway, eventually it's just a question of wanting to go home. We had parades on VE Day. That was actually back in Germany, but also in VJ Day we had another parade, this time in Pilsen. And those are the exciting things. We were sent on, we got tours, and they had shows come over. Bob Hope, you name it, those different people were over there. And then what am I trying to say? Oh, yes. I got a furlough. We were given furloughs, and they were random. I got one to Marseille, and somebody else got one to Great Britain. And that's where my relatives are. So I switched with them, and I signed up to go up to Scotland. So I think it was a 7-day deal by train. We had a couple of days in Paris, and then crossed over and went to Clydebank, Scotland. My mother's family, there were 10 of them in it, and I visited her favorite sister, Bella, and then she took me to the oldest guy, Robert. He had a nicest home, and actually they decided I should stay there. And once you know, my 2 brothers went through this whole exercise as well. They were both overseas there. But turns out every place we went, there was a party, and everybody else showed up. We'd go visit Uncle John, and he had a house that the U.S. had made, a prefabbed house that they sent over for him because his was bombed up there. They tried to bomb the shipyards there, and he lost his house. But it was interesting that most of them worked for the Singer Sewing Machine Company. They had a huge factory up there. And we toured all that stuff. We saw Loch Lomond, and it was a beautiful place, and so forth. We got to tour a lot and saw everybody. And eventually they sent me home. But I forgot to tell you that the mail clerk became my buddy in the company, and he went with me. And he played the piano. His name was Willie Kraft. And I thought maybe he's a member of the Kraft family. I never found that out. But he played piano at some of the places. We had a good time. So that was a wonderful time. After that, I was really just waiting to come home. And finally, my numbers came up, and I was sent home. Went to a place called Aschaffenburg, near Frankfurt, for a few weeks, and then everybody went to a camp at Le Havre, and they were all named after cigarettes. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but there was Chesterfield, Lucky Strike, and we went to Herbert Tarleton. That was I was the camp that I was at. And we were supposed to be there 48 hours. It was like 3 weeks. But eventually we did get on a ship. And it was the Vassar Victory. It was, I think, the first morning we were going down the channel. I was elected to work in KP in the kitchen, which was a good thing because that morning they made eggs and they weren't cooked right. And everybody else got sick. They also got seasick from being in the channel. So by the time the cooks ate, they didn't eat that stuff. They had soup or cereal or something. We were out in the Atlantic. And 10 days home, coming to New York and seeing the Statue of Liberty. It was just a big thrill being home. And got on trains and headed up here to Indian Town Gap, where I was discharged. And it was interesting that I met my buddy Weston Worst from high school there. I thought he was wounded, and I thought he would be home by now. But anyway, this is a sidelight here, Weston Worst's experience. He was in the 95th Division. I didn't even know that he was right next to the 94th at one point, and he was wounded, and he had a head wound. And they managed to get him out into a hole until the medics came, and they put him on a Jeep. Had four racks on it. They could take 4 patients at a time back to something they called it the Division Clearing Hospital. They're going to work on people and then ship them out. They found him that he was paralyzed and blind. And they operated, and that he was still in that condition. So they sent him to Paris for a couple of weeks to a hospital with French nuns, and then eventually to England. And there a nurse tried to move his legs. 2 guys were holding him, and she was trying to pattern his legs. That didn't work. And eventually a different doctor came along, took him into a room, and a darkened room, and looked in his eyes with a little flashlight. And all he said, Weston said, was that he said they didn't get it all out. So he obviously saw no damage to his eyes. So he had them operate again. They got more shrapnel out. There's still some there, but he recovered totally from the blindness and from the paralyzation. A miracle. I was going to tell you a story, just unbelievable. And one of the interesting things is that his mother, who was the doctor, didn't believe him that he was better. And so I wrote her a letter. He had sent me this letter while I was in the hospital, and he told me his mother didn't believe him. So I sent her a letter and said you should believe him because he says he's okay. I don't know what more I can tell you except that I was discharged in, January, about the 13th, I think, and sent home, and that was the end of the war for me.